And we are back. In light of the intersection of systemic and societal challenges concerning educational policies, it's crucial to recognize the regrettable truth that numerous students fall prey to the flaws within the American criminal justice system. Now, regrettably, individuals from marginalized groups, particularly students of color and those with disabilities, are disproportionately impacted by these issues. We've got joining with us now award-winning film director and producer of Preschool to Prison, Karen Baptiste, also known as Dr. K. Dr. K, good to have you.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you having this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's a joy to have you, and a joy to really talk about some of the work that you're doing. And so when we talk about the film, obviously a long time coming, and you're out there now. Talk to us about this film.
Well, so the film is a short documentary that really tells the story about what the education system is like in the United States and what the disproportionalities are for children of color and children with special needs, irrespective of race.
Right.
And what we find is that in this country is that the school to prison pipeline is not a new phenomenon. And what I did was really focus on, hold on, it's not just the school to prison pipeline, but it's the preschool to prison pipeline. And the reason we focused on preschool was because we found that the school to prison pipeline just became another phrase where people say, yeah, that happens, you know, and maybe those kids need to be there, and they don't really, you have some people advocating, you do have groups out there that are fighting against the school to prison pipeline, but we need more voices and more activism around it. Also, what I've found is that when you say the school to prison pipeline, you have an image in your head, right? And that image is usually of a child that is tall, right, that is older. And so when we start thinking about our youth, we often might think like, well, what did they do wrong? Maybe they need to be going to jail, right? That's what we think. But when you say preschool to prison, you get another image in your mind.
Exactly.
You don't see that tall child in your head. You don't see that. What you see is a little child. You automatically start thinking preschool, 4 years old, right? Which is about the age, and some kids come in at 2.9. So that's where we really wanted to focus on the zero tolerance policies that are used in schools to justify suspensions and expulsions for minor infractions. I'm not talking about crime.
Right, you're talking about minor stuff.
We are not talking about crime. We don't even address crime in the documentary. We are solely focused on non-criminal behaviors, right? With things where kids have been kicked out of school because of their hair. There was a story about 2 months ago with the young man in Texas who was kicked out of school because he has locks. I have locks. Right? And so can you imagine, I'm kicked out of school in 2023 when that happened. We're still kicking kids out of school for their hair. We've had kids restrained, dragged, and arrested in this country for crying too much on a carpet, not doing homework. Young lady was arrested during COVID for not doing homework. Another young lady was arrested for typing too much in the chat on Zoom. You know, these are the kind of things that we're addressing, not crime.
So looking at that, right, and you're coming into this, and here you are directing this film and finding these things out. Anything really take you by surprise in the midst of filming?
You know, I try to continuously remain surprised. And the reason I say that is because if I'm no longer surprised, that means I start to become desensitized. And I don't want to become desensitized. I want to remain centered in these stories. I want to continue to humanize the people who trust us enough to share their stories with us. And most of it is not surprising. What comes up more for me is disgust, right? Anger, but not surprise. I was a special education teacher.
Right.
You know, having worked in the system for almost 2 decades now, I've seen a lot. I've worked with educators across 32 states now. I've seen this in mass. It's not just here, right? It's everywhere.
And when you talk about seeing it everywhere, obviously, I want to say it's disheartening, right? To see it.
Yeah.
You think that you're living isolated sometimes. You want it to be isolated. You want it to be, hey, this is just over here. But as you travel around, now you're seeing it more and more.
Right.
What is the takeaways that you're getting from audiences who are recognizing now that this is more than just an isolated occurrence. I was thinking back to George Floyd, the time when George Floyd's murder was taking place. Will Smith was saying, no, this didn't change, it's just now on film.
Exactly. That's exactly. And the reaction we've been getting has been overwhelmingly positive. And I'm really grateful for that because, you know, one of the things that we talked about when we decided to do the doc was I was very clear with the crew of that we must ensure that we humanize the people who are sharing their stories. We want to remain sensitive to the people who are sharing their stories. We want to ensure that we tell their stories in an accurate way that depicts exactly what they want everyone to know, because these are experiences that you would never want to go through, right? I had a family member that was incarcerated, and I know exactly what that feels like as a family member. It's one thing when I was a teacher and I had students who were incarcerated. It stings, but it feels so different when it's your loved one.
Yeah.
Right? And so when that happened, you know, my family, we're still recovering from that. You know, my brother will never be the same after that. And so if I can bring awareness to this, which is what one of my goals, right, are to bring that awareness, but also the action. It can't just be awareness, but now that we're aware, what is the action? What are we going to do about it? Because we have too many children, right, that are going through. And in fact, a report showed that in 2021, only 7% of student arrests was for violent crimes. Only 7%. But we focus on that. Right. And people try to...
That becomes sensationalized.
Exactly.
Right.
And people want to muddy this movement around dismantling the preschool to prison pipeline for that 7%, when this is not even talking about violent crimes, right? We're strictly talking about nonsensical things that have been identified in schools as being a reason to remove students and suspend them or expel them, which is just completely ridiculous.
So for viewers out there that has the opportunity to see the documentary, how do they go about doing that? So
right now we're actually still in our film festival circuit run. We have been in film festivals for less than a year. So for a year we've been doing our run. We actually have 3 screenings this month, so people can follow us online. Definitely go to Preschool to Prison Doc on Instagram. We actually post there where we're screening. We do have a screening coming up on Sunday in Vero Beach, Florida.
Okay.
We also have another screening coming up this month in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is 30 minutes outside of Philly. And we've gotten a lot of requests over there. And then we do have another one coming up at the end of this month, the last weekend in this month, and that's going to be in Dubuque, Iowa. So, yeah, so we're really excited about where the film is going and how it's transcending across demographics and race, because this really is a serious issue. And if we don't take care of our children, who are our most precious asset, just think about what will life look like for us 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah, getting behind that lens and being out there to shoot, obviously, is to bring home the story.
Yes.
But it's also advocacy attached to it.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack this for a minute, because the advocacy that comes with the work that you do.
Yes, yes. A lot of the advocacy, you know, I've always been an advocate. Every time I've stepped into a school, every time I've sat with a school leader, every time I've just sat with an educator, period, every time I've sat with a lawmaker, it was always about speaking up for those who don't even know how to share what the issue is, who don't know how to ask for what they need, who don't know how to communicate, who don't have the access or the wherewithal, right? Because a lot of this also is the wherewithal to even know, where do I even go to even ask for this level of support? And many educators will tell you, I have no desire to be a part of politics. I have no desire to learn policy. I want to teach. Right? Like, you think about the joy and the excitement of teaching, like you come in because you want to make a difference, right? And that's what educators will always tell you, I want to make a difference. They're not coming in to change policy, but you then think, you know, thank goodness there are people like me and other organizations who really are about that and out in the front lines and saying, we are willing to do that for you, and we really do need to do something different. You know, our Black children only make up 15% of the student population in this country, but account for 41% of students who have been arrested, right? And so there's so many layers to this.
But the argument is going to be, those kids are bad. And your work has found?
It's not that the kids are bad. Kids need guidance. Kids need structure. We're not talking about, again, we're not talking about crime. We are talking about children doing things that are developmentally appropriate, where they have still been targeted, right, for these behaviors. What we also find is there's a large number of students with disabilities that are also part of this, right? I mean, when you start thinking about a person with a disability, most people get a visual image in your mind, right? And not all disabilities mean you have to have a physical impairment.
Right.
And so if we don't have an understanding, which we do need to increase training, and I do advocate for, we need improved training for educators around understanding disabilities and what the different disabilities look like. How does it manifest itself, right? Especially now you start talking about a child. So the human brain doesn't fully develop until 25. So you already have a child already dealing with, right, the growth, the adolescence. So now you add a disability to that. Right? So a lot of times teachers and educators in general, right, whether it's a teacher, a coach, a counselor, or a principal, are simply untrained and unaware of how those disabilities manifest itself, and so they don't know how to handle those behaviors. And so now calling school resource officers or school safety officers become the default, because I have an obligation to teach all the children here. I have a child who's not in compliance to what I think they should be in compliance to, right? And so now I need to hit that default button and call in the SRO or calling the school safety agent to come and remove that child, because I have to teach and I don't have time for this.
Right. And that's the scary part, to watch
Exactly.
how students' lives are impacted, whether it's academic records, disciplinary records that carry them and stay with them for, some stay with them for a minute. Others, of course, will fall off.
Right.
But the fact of just incurring that and not being able to really deal with the issue at hand, which really is sometimes such as a behavioral issue, but that's tied to mental health, right? And we're not connecting the dots. We're just using broad strokes.
I agree. And this is why we have to prioritize social emotional learning. We have to prioritize mental health in schools. We have children coming in with a lot of trauma. And let's be clear, we also have kids that don't come in with trauma, and the trauma gets developed at school, right? And so every adult is responsible. It's not solely placed on educators. It's not solely placed on parents. It should not be. Both have to come together and work together. We really have to take a whole child approach. We cannot ignore the traumas, because that also is going to manifest itself in the child's behavior. Right? So we have to start thinking about, what does retraining look like for educators? So part of my work is working with universities to revamp teacher prep programs, to revamp leadership prep programs, right? To ensure that we provide training and resources for parents. When you start looking at, let's start paring down what that looks like, right? So broadly, we had the All Kids, Keeping All Students Safe Act that was presented to the House in 2023. And what that act talked about was that it wanted to eliminate seclusion and restraint for kids. And that districts that had a very high number of kids that were restrained, that used severe punishment, have to have some type of report or something in place to show, what are you doing in lieu of restraining children, right? And when we're talking about restraint and seclusion, most times it's against a child with a disability. A lot of children with autism, right? So there's some sensory challenges there.
They have to be able to bridge those gaps.
Exactly. And so I'll give you a perfect example. A child, 5-year-old child, on the first day of school was suspended because the child had autism. Child ran into the bathroom, was scared, locked the bathroom. Another child was in the bathroom. They accused the child of going in and having, with the intent to have some inappropriate contact with another child. Right? That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. We're not talking about kids bringing in weapons. We're not talking about kids that assault.
Right. And I think there has to be a clear demarcation and delineation between what we're talking about here. And it's not that we're talking about the most violent ones. We're not talking about violent. We're talking about incidents that happen that are low-level offenses that get the full brunt
Exactly.
of consequences.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And when you speak to police officers, right, and this is where we talk about even training on that, how do we bring in SROs and police departments with school departments to talk about what training. No officer will ever tell you that they went into law enforcement to arrest children for crying on a carpet.
Right.
Children
Right.
running away. That's not what they came into this for now.
They didn't come into it for, and unfortunately, they've been put into
A precarious situation.
And I think
Yeah.
it does even worse in terms of the separation between community and police.
I
again,
completely agree.
on the fact of, now I see them in school. It's bad enough I see you out on the street.
Yes.
And I've got my own. Now I've got these school experiences
Exactly.
that are somewhat more closer to home and more personal. So,
Yeah.
a lot of work that has to be done. Before we go, please,
Yes.
how people get in touch with you, what do they do?
Oh, they need to go to our Instagram. We are all over social media. If they go to our Instagram, preschool to prison doc, DOC, and you'll see that's where we start listing. We put out videos. Also, if you go to preschool to prison documentary.com, that is all one word spelled out, and it's TL, not the number 2, but preschool to prison documentary.com. And there they will be able to see our videos, and they'll be able to find all of our social media handles.
Dr. K, thank you so much for being
Thank
with us.
you.
All right, glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Listen, we are taking a quick break, but guess what? We got more coming up. We'll be right back.